here in the PhD program with Kylie Hamlin as my advisor. And I'm coming to BC out of a program in Budapest, Hungary. So I've lived there for the past 6 years. And this is a research that I conducted as part of my MA thesis. And so the supervisors that you see listed there are from that project. This is a meta-analysis, and I'd like to say off the start that I am in no way an expert on meta-analysis, but I feel that in the current climate, it's a really great tool to have in your toolkit, and so I really wanted to undertake one to get to know how to use meta-analysis. So sometimes when I'm confronted with news media, violent imagery on television, I find it easy to forget that we are actually a remarkably pro-social species. We share resources with complete strangers. We comfort those in need. And we donate to many charitable causes. And as Julia mentioned in her poster presentation, being of assistance to others just generally makes us feel good. Pro-social behaviors are a set of behaviors that are intended to benefit others by meeting a need or improving welfare, as we all in this room know because a lot of us study prosociality. It's considered a multidimensional construct, which is composed of dissociable but arguably related behaviors. And these behaviors vary along a number of characteristics. You can see I've listed here, is it a costly behavior or not? Is it spontaneous, or is it a request from another person? Children who exhibit prosocial behaviors actually can experience a number of benefits, including increased peer acceptance. Other children like them more and want to engage with them more. Improved academic performance, they generally have better grades and are more comfortable in the academic setting. And they have more opportunities for social engagement, which, as we know, has a whole cascade of different effects. Many of us believe, and I myself believe, that socialization and the development of cognitive processes actually contribute to prosocial behaviors in very young children, and so this emerges within the first 2 years of life. So many labs are looking at the factors contributing to prosocial behavior, and there's a number of different ways that we can look at prosocial behavior and its underlying mechanisms. So some of us are looking at within-child factors to explain prosociality. Some of us are looking at environmental influences like parent values or cultural norms. Some of us are assessing what features of the situation contribute to prosocial behavior, such as the scarcity of resources. And some are looking at the recipient characteristics, like in-group membership, how needy is the person involved. One particular line of research has focused on regulatory processes, such as self-regulation and executive functioning, in trying to explain prosocial behavior among children. So executive functions, the componential view, I'll call it that, suggests that executive functioning is a multi-component construct that consists of these three basic level processes: inhibition, working memory, and cognitive flexibility. This has been tested in both the adult literature and child literature. And these can be combined to produce higher level functions such as planning and problem solving. By 6 months of age, children show very simple executive behavior responses. So there are many reasons to expect an association between prosocial behavior and executive functioning. For example, on a more general level, executive functions and prosocial behaviors share cortical pathways in the prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex. Also, as many of us have discussed today, children engage in cost-benefit analysis. They have to overcome potent responses like wanting to the personal gains that are involved in behavior. They have to sometimes down-regulate their own empathic distress. So there's many reasons why just the sheer level of complexity in prosocial behavior would suggest that there is some regulatory processes involved. More specifically, there has been research which has shown an association where taxing behavior through an inhibitory control process, or inhibitory control task, has led to decreased sharing behavior. And longitudinal and cross-cultural analysis have shown that inhibitory control can actually predict sharing and generosity. And preschoolers are really good at stating that how they should behave according to norms. So I should be sharing this with my friends, but they're not always good at following through on that expectation or that expected normative behavior. And so quite a few number of studies have explained that or looked at that in terms of a lack of inhibition on behalf of the child. So for this reason, and also looking at null results that have shown up in the literature, we felt that a meta-analysis could provide us with a better overall picture of this relationship between prosocial behavior and executive functioning for children under the age of 14 across different studies. It would also allow us to look at several moderator variables and how these variables could moderate that association between prosociality and executive functioning. So first of all, so as I mentioned, our primary analysis dealt with the association. We expected a moderate positive effect size between executive functioning and prosocial behavior. We also ran subgroup analyses to look at moderation by type of executive functioning. For example, did the study measure inhibition or cognitive flexibility? And also by type of prosociality. So did it measure, say, cooperation, or did it measure sharing? And we expected that this relationship would be moderated by the type of executive functioning, and that inhibition would probably exhibit the largest effect size. And also moderated by the type of prosocial behavior, in that cooperate, and we thought that cooperation would most likely have the largest effect size. We also ran a meta-regression to look at whether or not effect size would be larger for older than for younger children, and we expected that it would be. So as with any meta-analysis, of course, we started with a thorough literature search and screening process, running relevant search terms through several databases. We also manually checked reference lists and contacted authors for data from unpublished work and conference talks, poster presentations. We had a number of inclusion criteria. This was correlational data that we were looking for, mainly based on the fact that there just isn't enough experimental data in this area of research to allow us to conduct a meta-analysis on experimental research. Also importantly, it was a non-clinical sample of children who we included in this meta-analysis. Executive function had to be measured with a behavioral task, so Stroop task, or Simon says, or the task that the head, knees, shoulders task that Enda mentioned earlier. And this is because the large majority of the studies that are looking at executive functioning among children are actually using behavioral tasks to measure this. However, we allowed for prosocial measures to be measured with observation or teacher report or parent report because it seems almost 50-50 in the literature that these are being measured in these two different ways. However, you'll see that we included this in one of our moderator analysis to see if the impact of incorporating both observation and report measures. So after our final screening process, where we screened by full text and removed articles based on that inclusion criteria, we ended up with 18 articles and 22 independent effect sizes in our study. So as I said, we coded for a number of moderator variables, and And the first three pertain directly to our hypotheses. So this was the type of executive function, type of prosocial behavior, and mean age of the children in the study. Our second three can basically be considered control variables. For example, looking at how prosocial behavior was measured. And also we created a composite measure of study quality, and I'm happy to discuss that at the end of the talk, where basically studies received a 0 to 5 score based on things that were reported within the study, indicating the quality, for example, reliability analyses. So based on the funnel plot, visual inspection of the funnel plot, we felt that there was no indication of publication bias. We also looked at fail-safe N, which is a measure of how many studies it would take with a null result to turn the result that we did find to a null finding. These are commonly used in meta-analysis. And we saw no outliers in the data. So we did indeed find a moderate positive association between executive functioning and prosocial behavior. As we expected, that was not moderated by socioeconomic status, quality of study, or the measure of prosocial behavior used. I recorded both the Z-score, which is standard in meta-analysis, and also the R-score here, just to make it more interpretable for you. We also saw a trend towards a larger effect size with age. And we thought that this was somewhat interesting because it brought us to questioning if perhaps an increased recruitment of regulatory processes indeed occurs with age of the child. For example, maybe they're paying more attention to context when they're making these decisions to behave prosocially. However, in some of the poster talks today, I know that I don't see her immediately, but she was discussing how even very young babies are making cost-benefit analysis and using these strategies that we would consider might occur among older children as well. And also we wondered if maybe it was just the complexity of the tasks that were given to the older children. So maybe some of the more complex puzzle tasks or a dictatorship game paradigm, and perhaps this could somewhat account for that. We also found that the effect size varied by type of prosocial behavior, and indeed cooperation exhibited a larger effect size than sharing. Basically, in my opinion, cooperation at face value is definitely more complex than a lot of other prosocial behaviors, in that it's a series of regulatory processes that are involved in its production. And there is research that is also indicating that. However, I wondered also if perhaps this finding was relevant to other features of the prosocial behavior itself. So whether or not how costly it was, if it was spontaneously produced or not. So that's something that I would want to consider in future. Because of a limited number of effect sizes for the different executive functioning subtypes, we weren't able to statistically compare between them to say that, say, inhibition did show a larger effect size than cognitive flexibility or working memory. But we did look at each executive functioning component individually. And as you can see, there was a significant effect size for both cognitive flexibility and inhibition. And this basically says to me that although most research has looked at inhibition as the main subtype in their associations with prosocial behavior, we should also be considering other executive functioning subtypes when we're researching this association. So my take-home messages for you today from this talk First of all, I'd like to say that I do think that executive functioning is likely a key factor in the production of prosocial behavior. However, it needs to be considered as part of a multifactorial approach, obviously, because we see only moderate effect sizes. Also, it's important to consider that this was a correlational meta-analysis with a small number of overall effect sizes. So we need further exploration and experimental design to study this in more depth. Research is focused on inhibitory processes. There's definitely a bias in the literature towards looking predominantly at inhibitory processes, which may have driven this association that we did find. And so we also need to consider other forms of executive functioning, as I mentioned. And also it's important to look at this study supports the multidimensional approach to prosocial behavior. And on a practical note, supporting executive functioning and the development of executive functioning, even among typically developing children, may have many benefits for children, prosocial behavior being one of those. And that is all that I would like to talk with you about today. Thank you so much to my past colleagues at Florence University and my current colleagues at UBC and the Center for Anti-Cognition. Yeah, sure, I thought you might.
So when you were talking about earlier in your talk, you mentioned that there was at least one study that was experimental, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or that either tried to improve inhibition or in that produced more sharing or yielded more sharing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, I mean, when I listened to your talk initially, I was thinking that normally I think people would say, well, executive function might play a causal role, even though your meta-analysis was correlational.
Yes, exactly.
I'm just wondering if you think that these relations could be bidirectional in some way, where you may be able to improve prosocial behavior in an experimental context, and then in turn improve inhibitory control.
Yes, exactly. I absolutely agree with you, and probably should have mentioned that at some point in my talk, that of course there is a possibility for bidirectionality, because it is a correlational assessment, and although we do have some experimental research that suggests that it works in the other direction, of course, when children are engaging in prosocial behavior, they're also at the same time, building their regular